Welcome to Activism Munich. I'm your host, Zain Raza. Thank you for joining us on our second episode of Reconstructing Reality with Vijay Prashad. Vijay Prashad is an author, historian, and political commentator. He's also a professor of international relations at Trinity College in Connecticut, USA. He's the author of 17 books. Some of his recent books include No Free Left, The Futures of Indian Communism, and The Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South. Vijay Prashad, it's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thanks a lot.
So Vijay, in the last episode, we talked about a historical context of the global economic order. Now I want to get to the solution aspect. What should our alternative economic order look like, and what principles should it entail?
Well, the temptation for people on the left in particular, when we confront this vast, institutional arrangement that we know through experience is anti-people, the temptation is to go to the small scale and to find out if we can make cooperatives here maybe, or some new experiment there. I'm less, given to small-scale challenges, to the vast systemic problems we have in front of us. I think there has to be work done at two levels. At one level, there is already a challenge at the macro scale by the emergence of, for instance, the BRICS bloc to take on, the G7, the group of 7 countries, the advanced industrial states. So you have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which are countries that have themselves great problems with their own populations, often quite terrible development models. Nonetheless, because of the contradictions they face against Europe and the West, they have opened up for the first time in about 40 years an alternative institutional framework. And this is very important because it's challenged the West on its own terms, and it's created some space to think about alternatives. So rather than go immediately to the small scale and think about, say, cooperatives, etc., I think it's important for us to do a good, scanner of what's happening at the larger scale and how to understand groups like the BRICS, which, for instance, have been fighting for alternative ratings agencies, alternative development banks, and alternative means of transferring money, alternatives to the SWIFT network. So that, I think, is a very important development, and it's the first step in recreating the future.
Do you think the BRICS provide a viable alternative? And are there any shortcomings do you see within this group?
Well, the BRICS don't provide themselves an alternative to the development pathway. They have largely adopted the framework that we know as neoliberalism. Where there is a use for the BRICS is that they're challenging the institutional monopolies of the West. And by those, I mean the World Bank, the IMF, ratings agencies like Standards & Poor and Moody's. So at the institutional level, they're posing a challenge. On the other side, where there is an experimental and quite useful alternative, that can be seen in Latin America, where given the space afforded to Latin America because of the left-wing governments, from Venezuela to Bolivia, and even in Argentina and Chile, because of this institutional space provided by the BRICS on the one side and by Western, let's say, distraction with the Iraq war and with the credit crisis, they have been able to construct a regional or region-based institution. For instance, they created the ALBA, which is the Bolivarian Areas of the Americas, trade ensemble. But they also created, various institutions such as a virtual currency for regional trade called the Sucre. And why this is important is the Bolivarians or the South Americans have created trade networks which are based on mutual well-being and not on regional or national competition. I think they model for us something different. Now, neither of these approaches are blueprints for the future. What they are is what we have now within the contradictions on the one side of growth rates and on the other side of unemployment. Given that situation, there are various experiments that are trying to open up doorways to the future. And I think the left at this time should be looking for doorways to the future, not roads to the future.
You talk about these alternative models developing in the global south, Latin America, or even Southeast Asia. However, what could Western governments do to create a more harmonious economic order?
Well, look, the class realities in the West are, I think, against the people. In that, if you look at the countries, the largest countries in the West, Germany, the United States, perhaps France, Britain, in each of these countries, the ruling class and their political parties are in dominance, and they don't have any imagination to even understand that what's happening among the BRICS or in South America is any indication of the future. In fact, the opposite. They try to portray these experiments as either authoritarian or backward-looking, and themselves only as forward-looking. So there has to be, in places in Europe, in North America, there has to be a challenge from the people. I mean, this is how Latin America was able to make a breakthrough. It didn't come from seizure of power. It came through sustained struggle by people to create the electoral majorities that are now in most places unshakable. And what we're seeing in, say, Greece and Spain, these are indicators of what should happen across Europe. In other words, the majorities of people need to understand that their future is not to yoke themselves to the narrow-minded policies of the ruling class parties, but to understand that they need to produce their own political vehicle which carries at least a whiff of hope for the future. It's clear, of course, that parties in Germany or in Britain, they have no imagination for the future. They cannot carry the hopes of people. And that is a very difficult thing for large populations to understand. People live generally in a condition of fear and seeking convenience. People are afraid to make a leap into the unknown. So that is why it's very important for the agencies of the future to appear to the people as if they are not merely, angry with the system as it is, but they have an understanding of something that's profoundly better for the future than what the ruling classes provide.
Vijay Prashad, author, historian, and political commentator, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks a lot.
And that is all from the team in Munich. I'm your host, Zain Raza.
Thank you.